everyone, it's Shannon here for Hero Arts. In today's video, we are going to create this rainbow splatter card featuring the March My Monthly Hero Kit. To create this card, we're going to use a really fun ink trapping technique. We're going to start out with the splatter stamp set included in the kit. I'm going to use that large splatter for today's card. I'm going to position it in the upper left corner of an A2 panel of Dove White cardstock, and I'm going to partially ink this stamp first with Fruit Punch reactive ink. So I just inked it about halfway and then stamped it. Now I'm going to grab that same ink and ink that same area and stamp it again. This time I'm just trying to build up the intensity of the color and just get more of that ink down onto the paper. So I stamped it a third time here, and now we're going to move on to our next shade. So now I'm inking up the second half, or the other half, of the splatter in Creamsicle and orange ink. And then I'll stamp it a couple times or 3 times, just like I did the Fruit Punch. And by inking it up and stamping it several times, it not only builds up the intensity, but we're kind of overlapping a little bit every time of that area where we inked up with Fruit Punch, and that's going to create a nice gradation over that splatter as well. Now I've cleaned the stamp, and now I'm going to ink it up in clear embossing and watermark ink and stamp directly over that splatter. That will make that splatter really sticky, so we can grab some of that clear embossing powder and heat set this. And this has a really cool dimensional look, almost looks like it was real paint, but more importantly, it traps and protects that ink underneath. So basically this is kind of like a combination of techniques, one of them being emboss resist, which you'll see later. Now we're moving on to just kind of repeating this process for the splatter. I've repositioned the splatter, and now I'm inking it up halfway with Lemon Drop reactive ink. Once I finish stamping a couple times in Lemon Drop, I'll then move on to Key Lime Fizz, ink up that other half of the splatter with that. And after I've stamped that Key Lime Fizz a couple times, then I'm ready for my clear embossing watermark ink layer. So I stamped it with that clear embossing watermark ink, dipped it into some clear embossing powder, and then heat set. Again, just like I did before, but just 2 different reactive inks to start with. Now we've positioned the stamp, or repositioned the stamp again, and this time I'm going to first ink it up with Pool Party. I really love these reactive ink colors. They're so bright and beautiful, and they stamp lovely, and they create the most beautiful ombre looks when you do this partial inking technique. I inked the other half up in Blue Hawaii. Now we're ready for the watermark embossing ink. Place that, stamp that on top, and then we will dip it once more into that clear embossing powder. Then I'll heat set with my heat tool, and then we'll be ready for the final splatter. Now we're going to move on to completing our rainbow with a pink and a purple. I'm going to pick up my stamp here with my Misty, make a mental note of where I want that pink to go, because I am doing it in rainbow order. Inked up half the stamp with the pink, which is Taffy, stamped it a couple of times. Now I'm moving on to Grape Slush for the other half of the splatter, and stamped that also a couple of times. Cleaned my stamp, then stamped it in watermark embossing ink, dipped it into clear embossing powder for the final time, and then heat set with my heat tool. And here you can see this beautiful splattery rainbow. Almost looks like I used different color embossing powders, but I didn't, so it's pretty cool. Now I've trimmed this panel down. We could totally stop the card here, but I decided to take it up to the next level. And I did trim the panel down so it's a little bit smaller, and now I'm going to ink blend over the panel with intensified black ink. And because we've heat embossed those splatters in clear, that heat embossing is acting as like a resist and not allowing that black ink to penetrate that layer. So we're still getting that vibrant color that we had in the beginning, and it's really set off, or really the contrast of the black really helps to make this look have a really fun and vivid look. So I'm just finishing up here ink blending with that intensified black ink. Now there's a little bit of that ink, that black ink, on the heat embossed area, so I'll just grab a dry towel and just clean off those heat embossed areas so they're nice and bright. And here is that finished panel. So cool, has a really neat look, and it'll definitely make people wonder how you created that. So now moving on to our sentiment, I'm going to stamp this in first embossing watermark ink onto a scrap of Dove White cardstock, and then I'll pour over some detail black embossing powder over this sentiment, heat set with my heat tool, and then I'm ready to fussy cut this out. You could definitely, if you don't feel very confident in your fussy cutting skills, you can definitely just trim this out to be a sentiment strip instead, so just use your paper trimmer to have straight sides. But I like the tight look of a fussy cut sentiment, so I'm going to fussy cut this out. I think the biggest tip I can give you here is to, kind of rock your paper back and forth, add some additional bumps under the letters, follow closely the big loops like for the G or a Y, but for every other kind of letter, just kind of make it a little bumpy at the top. Even if it doesn't match the actual bumps of the letters, it will really make this look like you spent a lot of time cutting around everything. Your eye will kind of fill it in a little bit. Okay, so now that sentiment's fussy cut out, we're ready to finish this card, believe it or not. I'm going to start with an A2 panel of pitch black cardstock and adhere this onto an A2 top folding Dove White card base. You, of course, could just start with a pitch black card base, but I am hoarding my pitch black cardstock and using it very selectively. And now I will adhere my panel down with some foam adhesive. This adds some nice dimension. Then we'll finish the card with that sentiment, but also apply some foam adhesive to it. So just give that final bit of dimension and just kind of offset it here to the right, and that will actually complete the card. I'll hold up to the camera here so you can get a good look at that trapped ink technique. It's super cool. Again, I think it will make people wonder, how did you do this? And especially with that ombre color, because that's not easy to achieve with even colored embossing powders. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you have any questions about the products I use, please check out the links below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.